Rossetti. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll just say a few words and I'll really kick it over to Mr. Rossetti to present some of the details. But certainly, the discussion today on House Bill 42, from my perspective as a director, is directly in line with the purpose statement of your Department of Transportation, which is to support the economy of our state, connect our communities, and make lives better for the residents of the state. And as we were approached, actually a couple of years ago now, with this concept of, hey, will you let, ORVs be in the right of way to connect trails and work with state parks, we had to scratch our head a little bit. And we worked to get to yes. And over the 2 years of discussion here, really what you see is this bill and a companion bill, which really had to do with the safety of ORV operation, which has already been heard in both houses, and I believe was signed by the other chamber just yesterday. So this is a companion bill. Certainly, we are in agreement with it and support it, and think it's a wonderful idea for the economy of the state, and we'll work to support it as we go forward. Certainly respect the leaders in this space and understand the challenges of us in our state as we work to diversify our economy. And we stand in support and will support that initiative. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll kick the mic over to Mr. Rossetti and let him maybe say a few things and walk through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator at WYDOT. As the director mentioned, this is really the second piece of a two-part effort. Did start it pretty much in earnest last year, and this bill here is actually the one that got us hung up last year. And really what it's the heart of this bill is, especially for those folks that live along the interstate corridors, that those interstates often bisect communities. In a community like Cheyenne here, where you've got one going north and south and one going east and west, it actually can kind of create a barrier in multiple ways. And it's been longstanding law that ORVs were not permitted to operate within interstate rights of way. Now, that's been longstanding, I believe, since probably the early 2000s. Lots of reason for that. Again, I think safe operation within the interstate right of way. And what you've got to think is fence to fence within the interstate rights of way. So as the director mentioned, we had some lots of brain power used to do this. And what we've come up with is the bill in front of you that actually sets the conditions under which folks would be able to cross interstates or potentially establish a trail in conjunction with our partners in state parks that would allow for short distances folks to operate these vehicles in those interstate rights of way. As far as the bill goes, Mr. Chairman, the first language that we change is in 31.5.124, and it's there at the bottom of page 1 on the engrossed copy. And what we've changed that wording to be, and I'll just read this to you just because I think it makes it a little bit easier, but off-road recreational vehicles shall not be operated on the roadway or right-of-way of an interstate highway except in accordance with Wyoming Statute 31.5.16.01E. You notice what that change does is it starts to set the exception. When could they possibly be in the interstate rights of way? 31.5.16.01 then talks about the operation within those highways. And this is a section that we changed in that earlier bill, and this bill works as a companion with that. But the changes there in 16.01 related to this bill, again, starts there on page 2, lines 10 and 11. Again, it gets you to the exception. It except as provided in subsection E of this section. Right below that on lines 13 through 17, we go further, Mr. Chairman, and we actually set those conditions a little bit more clearly. So the amendment there on 13, starting on 14, brings in all of the off-road recreational vehicles. That definition for 31.1.101A XVK is off-road recreational vehicles. That's a 3-part definition. So you've got your four-wheelers, your dirt bikes, and your side-by-sides. I think that's kind of the way to think about what that 31.101 reference is there. So that's the universe of the off-road vehicles that we're talking about here. shall not be operated on the roadway or right-of-way of an interstate highway except as authorized by the department rules and except that an off-road recreational vehicle under this subsection. So that then sets the stage again for where we go. One of the changes that we made, and the why this is an engrossed bill rather than just a standard bill that came over to this side, is we set two conditions. One of these conditions is that parallel pathway, and then the other condition is actually the crossing of the interstate right-of-way. So that's how this bill is constructed. The first situation starts there on the bottom of page 2, line 19, and runs through page 3, line 2. That's talking about the features that would be present if we were to have a pathway that runs parallel or within an interstate right-of-way. And one of the important things that I think came out of most of our discussions, specifically last year and through the interim, is there on lines 20 and 21. And it talks about that there will be a physical barrier between the trail and the interstate highway. We were a little bit vague, I think, in what that barrier might be, because in a very wide right-of-way, it might be something as simple as a fence. However, in a more narrow right-of-way, it might have to be a bigger physical barrier, Jersey barrier or something that actually prevents vehicles from actually coming into conflict. So that then is again left to kind of the rulemaking process, working with our partners at state parks and then the local community to ensure that if that does exist, we do that in a safe manner. So that physical barrier could be the full gamut. It could even just be a natural berm, fence, or Jersey barrier. So that's kind of your condition number 1. It goes on further than there on page 3 and adds the conditions that in these interstate rights of way, much like on highways, you must be operated by a person with a valid driver's license. And then lines 8 and 10 talks about whether you have a license plate or that trail sticker with state parks. So this again sets that condition and works very well in partnership with Senate File 17. Moving then further, sir, lines 12 through 16 on page 3 discusses the second way in which you could cross an interstate, and that's really at a separated crossing. So think over or under the interstate. So those are the two conditions that we saw that would allow us to get across an interstate and start connecting these trails and the trail systems to start generating the economic development that the folks have the vision for. Moving further through that committee, lines 18 through 20 and page 4, lines 1 through 3 are really the same conditions repeated from 4 through 10 above. Again, it talks about having the driver's license and being properly registered or stickered with the trail program. With that, Mr. Chairman, that explains the bill.
Thank you. And if I could have you back up, and I missed when I was writing my notes. 3-part definition, page 2, line 13, 4-wheelers, dirt bikes. What was the third one?
It's really your side-by-sides, Mr.
Side-by-side.
Chairman.
Okay. All right. Committee questions, or did you want to pass it down? Okay. All right. Committee questions? Let's, if I could have you one more time. Our main conditions with this, if we consider it then. The physical barrier, will let rules define what that barrier be depending on the situation. Other conditions being the license plate, the stickers, and then separate grade crossings. Is that pretty fair summary, or?
Mr. Chairman, yes. The only other thing that I didn't cover, but it is also in here, is if you look at that on page 2, lines 23 through the top of page 3, it then again mentions that these things will be constructed if they're enrolled into the trail system managed by state parks. So it's not the department going out and just building segments of trail. We're going to try to do this in a meaningful manner so that we're connecting segments within the trail system to actually make these things work. So that's also part of this bill, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I would see that as really a key critical point is as we do this, it's in support of state parks, which then is really in support of a local community and local initiatives there in terms of the trails. So for us to go to put one of these in, it really is done in conjunction with state parks, and they'll put it in and they'll operate it and they'll maintain it. But it's in our right of way, and the statute's now been changed to permit that to be in there because right now it's expressively, prohibited.
Okay. Change takes care of it. Thank you. Director, members of Wyandotte, I appreciate you working with us. I know this, when we first talked, was a little bit of an unpleasant subject, but we found ways to make it work on a regional concept, and we hope to take this regional template, make sure that it works, and share it with other places in the state. And appreciate it. Committee, anything else for these gentlemen? Thanks for giving up your lunch hour to come over to the Capitol. Thank you. You got roads to close or open, right? All right. Okay. Any other agencies? Go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Dave Glenn, Deputy Director of Wyoming State Parks, Historic Sites and Trails. First off, I just want to say thanks to WYDOT for sitting down and having these conversations with us. And as Director Reiner said, finding ways to get to yes. We've worked hand in hand with them and the interim committee as we've kind of worked through this process. Really, this came to light, and I know there's some other people that are going to testify, but it happened when they called us, Mark Tesoro with Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails about 3 years ago and says, I've got this idea. I'm seeing all these OHVs and off-highway vehicles driving by on the freeway on trailers, but they're not stopping in Evanston. And what do we need to do to kind of create a hub where we can connect communities and trails with these, so people would stop and spend their money and then go home? And so we started working, our trails program and our outdoor recreation office started working with them hand in hand to kind of develop some routes that would work. And as Director Reiner mentioned, when you go to the northern Uintas south of Evanston and you've got 500 miles of trails, but you want to connect that with Kemmerer or maybe over to the Wyoming range, you've got to go under the freeway to be able to do that. And so this is kind of how this all came about. And I want to step back a little bit. You know, that the rules that we have in place right now is communities have the ability to enroll routes into our off-highway trail system. And what that means is if a community desires, we don't parachute in and say, this is what you need to do. But I'll use Evanston as an example. If they want to come in and enroll some certain city streets that would allow OHVs to be used on there, they would have to have all the safety equipment, but they could do that with the little trail sticker versus a license plate. And the reason that's important is a lot of states outside of Wyoming do not allow you to put a license plate on your OHV. So if we have folks coming in from out of state, they have the right insurance, they have the right equipment, they can buy a sticker from us and then drive from their motel to the restaurant, drive from their motel to the trailhead and keep going on that route. So that's kind of the reasoning on how we move forward. I'll probably leave it at that, but I would stand for any questions if you have any questions.
Mr. Glenn, are you comfortable with what the director said is you had to work to make it work within the park system? Are you comfortable with what we finally reached there?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And frankly, WYDOT brought up a lot of things that we hadn't considered. And I would throw out, you know, if there's a need for a perpendicular crossing, first off, they're going to come to us. State Trails is going to look at it and say, does this make sense to put a perpendicular crossing here? Yeah, okay, we're connecting 500 miles of trail with 1,000 miles of trail and some historic sites and, you know, Fossil Butte and some other things. This makes sense to do that. Then we would go to WYDOT, hat in hand, and say, we're looking at a crossing somewhere along this stretch. WYDOT has the final say on this from the safety perspective, from all those things. They're the ones that say yes or no. And if they say yes, then it'll come back to us and we'll say, okay, we'll enroll that into our program, which means we help fund it, we can help maintain it, grants can be available, and that's kind of how that system would work. So we've been very privileged to be able to work with this team with WYDOT.
Thank you. Do you have any influence with National Monuments?
Mr. Chairman, I know we've been working with you on that heavily, and I think we're going to need our congressional delegation to help us with that one a little bit.
Check while you're here. Thank you. Folks,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're going to get asked about the cost and just kind of more detail on how that works. And I would add, Mr. Chairman, that when I was TRW chair, this issue came up. I didn't think we had the tools in the tool belt to look at this, so asked Chairman Landon to look at it. And so what a lovely thing to have a bill put together that
First cross.
I didn't have to do a whole lot of work on. And here it is. But anyway, if we could understand how we contemplate the funding working.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis is a very good question. So our Trails program is funded a couple of different ways. One is from the sticker fees that we use, and then the other is a gas tax. The certain percentage of the gas tax goes to OHVs because they're the ones that are using that fuel. we're pretty stringent and strict with those dollars. We're quite conservative. And I'll give an example. This 3-mile stretch along the freeway that the SWAT team is looking at, if there was a barrier that needed to go in there, a physical barrier such as a Jersey barrier, $2 to $3 million. For us, we would look at that and go, that is not a wise use of state funds to be able to do that, of user fee funds and state funds to be able to do that. And we may not enroll that trail. We may work with them to fundraise and say, we'll match a certain percentage on other things. Would it cost additional dollars outside of what we have? That is not our plan. They would need to be fundraised dollars or Trails program dollars.
Clear on that? Any follow-up? Okay, good. Anybody else? State Parks. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you for working with Whiteout on this. Okay, further agencies? Okay. Anybody else in the room that would like to testify? Mr. Winnie? Oh, sorry, we got a legislator first. I apologize. I looked right past Senator. 2 legislators, both of you sit down. Both sides of the building represented here. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chairman Dockstader, members of the Minerals Committee. I stand in full support of House Bill 42. I'd like to give you a practical example of something that's happening in Green River that's an impediment currently, and this bill would solve that impediment. There's a crossing underneath Route 80, and that crossing basically goes across White Mountain and then down into some Rock Springs side, down into Green River, where all the restaurants are and gas stations. And you cross under Route 80. So if you don't have a plate, you can't do that legally. So this will solve that problem. And I think there's a lot of places amongst our different crossings in the state where it would be beneficial. So I think it's definitely a positive thing. It's a good thing economically. And I think there's an untapped resource of UTVs, ATVs out there that could utilize the trails and to benefit the entire state once we have a system like we're talking about now. So I'll stand for any questions.
Senator, you probably represent the biggest municipalities in that area, that combined area. Are people catching on to the concept of what we're putting together here for them? That's we're opening up a big travel tourism opportunity here.
Chairman Dockstader, members of the Minerals Committee, yes, I think what they were missing were the tools. You know, the question was just how do we do this? And to date, I think it's consolidated into a plan. So I think they're waiting for a plan and a mechanism on how to make this happen. And I think from what I've heard, being the council meetings, they're amenable. They just needed a way to do it. And I think this bill, combined with the last bill, gives them that way to do it.
All the questions from the committee while we hear from Representative. You're kind of ground zero where this got started. Thoughts on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And members of the committee.
Say your name for the record here with these.
I'm Representative Ryan Berger from Evanston, Wyoming, House District 49.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My hands are sweating. It's not because I'm nervous,
We're a friendly group.
but they're sweating because of how excited I am and how proud I am of all these people coming together, networking, and putting this together. I kind of echo the words of Senator Ellis. I didn't have to do much on this. I was in the early beginnings in my other career, coaching and listening to all this. And my good friend back here from Evanston who came up with this idea, and I've heard it through the papers and have worked through it. And now here I am as an elected official, and I'm very much support of this bill and very much proud of the work that our economic development boards have done in Southwest Wyoming and how they've worked with the highway department and what I've seen with our trails department. And it's just an amazing thing to see. And I'm so excited to see the networking that they've done. And we're coming up with solutions to economics in Southwest Wyoming and the potential for the rest of Wyoming. And I'm proud to be a part of that and proud to stand up and say, I am for this. This is a great thing.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr.
Chief
Chairman.
Rays, in your conversation, we're coming up with solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, maybe now's a good time to ask. I saw a lot of changes that were made in the amendment. I don't see the introduced version, but I see the amendment. Can you walk us through why the amendment was necessary and what happened over on the House side?
Go ahead, Representative.
That's, what, can
Got a
you
lifeline.
help me on that amendment? I guess I'm not, a little now I'm nervous.
That's why I'm
What?
asking you.
I know, that's a great question. Can I look at that one?
Oh,
Representative Berger?
Oh, yes. You want to help me on that? Okay,
do you want a lifeline there?
yeah, I need a lifeline. Representative, or Mr. Rossetti will help us through that. And remember, we split this. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Rossetti will explain it better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis. So one of the things that we worked through and was a hangup last year was, again, we have the parallel concept and then the perpendicular crossing concept. So what we did in the amendment really was we separated those into two separate paths. So you have Romanet I there on page 2 that starts, and that starts talking about that parallel pathway. Romanet 2 then talks about the perpendicular crossing, and the reason we went down that path was in the event that one or the other became a conflict, and we didn't want it to hold up the bill. So if some folks had an issue with the perpendicular crossing, it allowed that part to be amended out pretty simply. Or if they had an issue with the parallel crossing, it allowed that to be. We really thought if we bifurcated that, it was just more clear.
Chairman, just to follow
Go
up.
ahead. Go ahead.
So another way to say it is Romanet 1 and Romanet 2, were they mushed together and you separated them out?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, exactly.
All right, thank you. Further questions while we've got him here at the table? Okay, committee? All right, anything else from our representative senator? Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you, White Out again. All right, those who'd like to testify,
I'm good. I've got one.
Mark, have a seat, identify yourself.
Good afternoon, Mark Tesoro with Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails, also called SWAT. Thank you, Chairman Dockstader, for the opportunity to present this project again in front of the committee. This project is an economic development project that was started a little over 3 years ago in Evanston. An idea of bringing riders into the state with off-road vehicles so that they could come in, stay in a hotel, eat in a restaurant, fill up at a gas station, and ride between the communities and see all that there is to see in Southwest Wyoming. Places like historic Fort Bridger, the Piedmont Kilns, Brigham's Arrow, Spring Valley, the exciting stuff that is historical in the area, and spend some money in the communities as well. The Economic Development Group asked me to spearhead a working group to bring some stakeholders to the table for this project. So I reached out immediately to Senator Schuler and her late husband, Rick Schuler, who was the district ranger for the Forest Service for about 30 years. And the three of us started putting together some working group individuals to advance this project. Once we were able to work with the city of Evanston and their county and their city council, they adopted their streets and roads into the State Trails program. And the other communities started hearing about it as well. So the communities of Evanston, Lyman, Mountain View, LaBarge, Marbleton, Big Piney, Superior, and Granger have all enlisted their trails or their roads into the State Trails program. Really, we would not be where we're at today without the assistance of WYDOT and the State Trails, State Parks, and Outdoor Rec Office. They have been fantastic partners in helping launch this project. And again, we did have a bill that went to the legislature last year, and it was picked up as an interim topic throughout the year. We've had many legislators work on this project with us and have attended city council and county commission and public meetings. Senator Dockstader, of course, Senator Schuler, Senator Baldwin, former Representative Ayer, Representative Heiner, former Representative Burt, and of course, Senator Kolb. Last summer, we did take a ride just outside of Rock Springs with Senator Jones and Senator Kolb and some officials from Sweetwater and Sublette County, connecting the Red Desert to Rock Springs, a 110-mile loop to go see things like the Boar's Tusk, the Tri-State Territory Marker, and the Red Desert. There is so much to see in Southwest Wyoming, and we just have, as a state, kind of not focused on the possibilities and the potential for economic benefit to the communities. This is something that's been done in many other of our surrounding states, and they benefited from it greatly. In southern Utah, Garfield County and their trail system down there reported a $33 million economic benefit from having trails connecting communities. And we just haven't done something like that here in Wyoming. And what better way than with tourism and outdoor recreation being the number 2 driver in the state to invite people to this region, to this area, and to the state for that matter, to come and ride. The stakeholders that we've had involved since the beginning, city councils and county commission, Forest Service, the BLM, Game and Fish, Chambers of Commerce, the Department of Ag and the Weed and Pest Division, nonprofit groups like Muley Fanatics, Tread Lightly, and Wyoming Wildlife Foundation, business, industry, law enforcement, highway patrol, sheriff's offices, of course, WYDOT, state parks, state trails, the outdoor recreation office as well. This really is maybe an unconventional way to look at bringing people into the state, but with as much public lands and access and existing county and state roads that are out there, it's just a possibility that has not been tackled yet. So this rights of way bill and the partner bill for this, Senate File 17, is just a fantastic way to bring people into the state. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Tesoro, when you first started this, tell me a little bit about what you saw in your community and around the region as people were coming in. You could see trailers coming in looking for recreational opportunities, but yet wasn't quite organized. You're kind of at the community that's a gatekeeper just off the hill from you to a lot of people looking for recreation, and you're seeing it in your community. Some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely appreciate that, Chairman Dockstetter. Let me give just a really quick example of what I saw, one of the best examples, and Senator Ellis may remember this as well. One day in downtown Evanston, I saw a vehicle pulling about 6 or 7 ATVs and side-by-sides. And I drove across the street and I stopped and I said, "Where are you guys riding? Where have you been?" And they said, "Well, we just got back from southern Utah. We did a 8-day, 1,000-mile journey throughout southern Utah, connecting all of the communities." And I said, "I'm working on a project that is similar to this in Southwest Wyoming so that you can come and ride." I said, "Where are you guys from? Where are you riding? Where did you come from?" They were from Tennessee. They came out all the way from Tennessee and have come out many times to the west to ride, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and a few times in Wyoming, but very short trips, out and backs, maybe out and back in the Bighorns, out and back in Sundance. And I said, "We're working on a project that will connect thousands of miles with communities in Southwest Wyoming." I kept in touch with that gentleman, and he testified last year in Senator Ellis's TRW committee. That is what we're talking about, the possibility of bringing outside riders into the state to spend their money and make these connections, these paramount connections with rights of way, existing roads and trails, and communities on board to make this happen.
Thank you. Committee, questions for Mr. Tesoro? Okay, seeing none. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Presentation, thank you. Others? Go ahead, and we got one in the holding pattern there. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I live in Bondurant. We use these, I have a Polaris UTV crew cab. I use it for transportation a lot. It has tracks on it in the wintertime. I carry grandkids in it. A year or so ago, when a similar bill came up, I spoke against it primarily because of safety. I support this bill, let's be clear. And I've since done things with my Ranger to make it even safer. So a near miss that I almost had with an 18-wheeler won't happen again. But if you think about the UTVs with 18-wheelers, hence the interest on Interstate 80, there'd be nothing left but a grease spot if they had a collision or something. WYDOT's put their thinking caps on and done some good work here. I like what I see in here. It's a good separation scheme. That's exactly what was needed. This bill is about making it easy for people from outside the state to come here and spend their money. I support the bill. Subject to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, committee. Questions for Mr. Winnie? None, thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Fraser, Executive Director, Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I want to appreciate what the legislature's doing here. Hats off to both chambers on this one, and really appreciate what WYDOT has done in terms of the safety aspects of this bill. I think that's hugely important. I guess what I really wanted to add to the discussion is, while I appreciate that the Southwest part of the state has really taken the lead on this, as some of the other testimonies indicated, of course, this not only be a handsome economic driver there, but in other parts of the state as well. So we look forward, not just in that region, but in the other regions of the state, working with our partners, especially WYDOT, to drive some more economic development all over the state. So with that, I think it's all been said. I won't repeat it, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Mr. Fraser, what do you think about that concept? We get this finalized here, kind of a Southwest program in place, got a template, and then we move it out to other regions and say, here's what we have. And we've even laid the groundwork with the legislation. Do you think Wyoming Association of Municipalities help us take that message when we move the template out? Go ahead.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Would love to help with that. In fact, I can foresee not only using the template in other regions, but connecting some of the regions as well. So yes, we're very much on board to help out where we can. And frankly, we do a lot in communicating. That's one of our primary jobs, is to communicate with all the municipalities and to be a conduit through which they communicate with each other. So I could see us not only discussing this at our various region meetings, but even having a presentation by by our members in the Southwest at our annual conference, kind of showing the success and sharing it as a best practice. So yeah, I think we could do a lot of good in communicating that.
Appreciate that help. Questions for Mr. Fraser, ma'am? Okay, seeing none, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Go ahead. Representative, back up the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ryan Berger, again, House District 49. Just a little picture of what's going on in Evanston right now. A lot of snow. And we have a lot of people coming to Evanston to ride their snow machines. They come to Evanston, kind of that gateway up to the Uinta Mountains. And these people bring in their snow machines, and you see two on a trailer. But what you notice about snow machines is nowadays they're just seating one person, okay? A little picture in the summer, when these side-by-sides come in through Evanston in the summer, they're seating 4, 6, they're seating a lot, multiple, they're seating the families. So now in the summer, they're bringing their wives, they're bringing their children, their grandchildren, and they want to take them out and go see. So just a little bit bigger, even a bigger economic impact is what we see. And that's something that Mr. Tesoro has brought up in our house, and that's things that we've been talking about. So both of them are great economic drivers, and they really are beneficial to not just Evanston, but Southwest Wyoming right now, and even up in the Northwest as well. So I'm excited to hear your vote, and thanks again. Stand for any
Representative,
questions.
This is kind of a question for you and Mr. Tesoro, but you can answer for him. Concept of putting together something that wayfinder concept. Where do we come into a town? Where are these maps? Where are these roads? Where do we eat? Where do we stay? Is that something you see regionally, or the towns, the university chambers working on that? What do you see happening there? I know Mr. Tesoro has already reached out to one area and looked at an actual publication that they've done for regional concept. Your thoughts? We'll let him jump up here.
Yeah.
both of you can address it.
Great question, Mr. Chairman. And what I see going on is now the ability to write grants and off recreational grants to get that started. And that's been a big question, not only for members in the House, but other people in Wyoming are going, hey, we want to come down and do this. Where's the trails? Where's the advertising? That's the next step. And that's what we want to do is really put that out there and start promoting this. And we're going to, I believe we'll start putting in for those grants so we can make those. There are already some out there, but we can do better.
Travel and tourism. Thank you. Go ahead. Mr.
Chairman Dockstetter, thank you. There really is a great opportunity to start marketing this once we're able to make some of these rights-of-way connections happen. Our group, SWAT, did put in for a trails grant to build and put together a magazine that could be used to market throughout the whole region. I presented in the summer transportation meeting a magazine that had been put together by a group out of Idaho, and they had a picture of the Tetons, the backside of the Tetons. And what I'm recommending is that we do the front side of the Tetons, and we do Wind River, and we do the Red Desert, and we do all of the fantastic areas that we can be starting to showcase throughout the state of Wyoming. This is not just a Southwest Wyoming centric project. This is something that can be done statewide. Just a matter of getting some of the pieces in place to make that happen. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, gentlemen. Senator.
Senator John Kolb, Senator District 12. Mr. Chairman, just wanted to add, we don't need any grant money. It's going to be fine and dandy if we do get grant money. This is a community-driven choice, like the city of Rock Springs or Green River. It's their choice to do it or not. Some signage, yes. But I just wanted to emphasize, this does not depend on any grants. This is a local-driven choice.
Make it work financially. And Senator, I might suggest, and you maybe agree, that who knows what kind of spin-off businesses will result from all of this. People get very creative when there's a new market for something.
I think it's a fantastic choice that we can offer this to the communities, which I'm sure it's a statewide issue, and they can copy it anywhere. There's no waiting period. If they wish to go ahead, I think Southwest Wyoming is probably ahead of the game because we've had discussions vis-a-vis Mr. Cicero. But once the template's laid out, I think it's gonna be pretty easy to cut and paste for any community that wishes to be part of a larger network of trails.
Thank you. Thank you for clarification on that one point.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Committee, Darren Westby, Director of State Parks and Cultural Resources. I won't belabor everything that's been said, but everything that just transpired over the last probably 5 minutes is exactly why we need the Office of Outdoor Recreation in our agency. They have the ability to grab all the information, put it in some resemblance of product that we can get out, and then we work with the Office of Tourism to market it significantly. I love the idea of grassroots spending revenue coming in from locals to make this happen. We're here to help make sure that it is done and done right. And we have the Office of Outdoor Recreation and Office of Tourism also created the Wonder Map is what we call it. It's a web application that you can go out and type in trails in Southwest Wyoming, and the trails will start to populate as we start getting these things connected. So Representative Berger, I'm with you. I'm excited with the possibilities of where we're at right now, where we've come, and where we're looking into the future. The vision, you guys talked about other parts of our communities within the state grasping onto this template that we're doing in Southwest Wyoming. Border to border trail. We already have backcountry discovery routes that routed some motorcycles through our state, which has been hugely economically beneficial. You start looking into the off-road vehicle recreation through our state, done sustainably, responsibly, can be a huge boon. And so I commend everybody that spoke today, but I just wanted to talk about the Office of Outdoor Recreation, that could be that collaborating entity that can really tie it all together and make sure it's going forward.
Director,
Thank
you're
you.
saying we have the resources there. Senator Cooper.
Thank you. Chairman. Mr. Westby, in other areas such as the Bighorns, this has been going on for a long time. It's just not, these folks have done a really great job of organizing it and maybe a little more planning. But right now, in my community, for example, we get hundreds of people a year come in here with their ATVs or their snowmobiles. And if you know where you're going, you can ride right now from the Cody city limits to Baggs to Rock Springs to anywhere, really. So are there future plans for the state parks to incorporate these trails together to make it more organized? And then secondly, I see on this on page 2 of the bill, line 22 and 23, it talks about crossing underneath marked or signed as a Wyoming off-road recreational vehicle trail. The biggest deterrent we got in our area is either rivers or the interstate, same as anywhere. But when they, for example, when they ride from Tinsleep to KC and stop and have a sandwich and then turn around and come back, they've got to go underneath the interstate. It's not a marked trail. Maybe this is a YDOT question, but how do we make all of this tie together? Because all of these crossings are not going to be marked. I can think of basically every interstate interchange from Buffalo to Casper has a potential for ATVs. It's all interconnected.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, and I don't want to speak for YDOT, but I think that's exactly why this bill is necessary. Right now, I think people are using crossing underneath an interstate or a highway or over, and realistically, that's illegal per statute. And so by getting this bill passed, it creates the opportunity for YDOT to enroll that section within the State Trails Program, mark it as a legal crossing of a highway or an interstate, and then that is what starts to connect our communities. Right now, that's exactly why Evanston and Rock Springs can't get connected, is because we have some gaps in which we need to have this work. And having that enrolled route, whether it be parallel to the interstate, or we need to take a piece of trail that ends right here and cross underneath the interstate to connect to another trail, that's exactly what we're going to have to do. And with the help of the State Trails Program within our agency as well, and the Office Outdoor Recreation, coordinating all the efforts of enrolling some of these roads and highways and trails and routes within those local communities to connect Tinsleep to Evanston is going to take a very large coordinated effort, but the team's really excited to work with the communities and see what we can do.
Thank you. Senator? Okay. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to let it go, but I just think in my experience in the Senate, whenever it comes to state parks, we're going to have a lot of questions about how much money is in the budget for this. What you envision, you just said, 2 to 3 million for, some kind of barrier is probably not something you would do. So I'm trying to figure out what the existing sideboards on it are with funding for your participation. Is it a 1-to-1 or something different than that? Is there a max amount that you'd be willing to allocate? I mean, we talked about the fundraising piece, but you also talked about there'd be use of state funds. I'm a believer in what you're trying to do. I just want to make sure that when we bring this to the floor, I can promise you, Mr. Chairman, we're going to have a lot of questions over your budget, where this money's coming from, how these matching dollars will work. And I just want to make sure we've got all that really ready to go.
Sure.
Because it's coming. I think that's fair, Mr. Right.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis, thanks for the question. I'm starting to regret why I stood up and wanted to support the Office Outdoor Recreation. But no, it's a great question. And right now, just like the Office Outdoor Recreation, State Trails doesn't parachute in and say you need this connector. We let it come from the grassroots, and they say we want to connect this, and then YDOT and Parks get brought into the conversation, and we figure out a way to say yes, as Director Reiner did. And from a cost perspective, right now, passing this bill is a zero cost, right? There is no project on the books right now that is coming to us that says we want to do this. That's further down the road. And from our perspective, doing a $3 million barricade connector would be very difficult for our agency to do. So we would be requiring the locals to either foot the bill or a large percentage of the bill. And then we can augment either through fees, through a grant, through the fees of the sticker program, as Deputy Director Glenn said, the gas tax, or we have the Recreation Trails program that's a federal granting program that we are fortunate enough to grant as well. So there's the future possibilities, but we can't bankrupt the program by one project killing the entire thing. So we would have to prioritize whether or not we do that or not, or we do a fraction of it or half of it, or whatever the matching is from a private perspective. But I don't see it at this point being a detriment financially, this bill passage. And Deputy Glenn is here to save me, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, the majority of these are going to cost $0. It's, if you think of the underpass that Senator Kolb was talking about, we would go to YDOT and say, is this one we can enroll? They would say yes. We make a map and it's done. That's all it is. So the majority of these are not going to cost that much money, if anything. The mapping program, that's what we budget for. Our Trails program has a great mapping program set up. We would make some additions and then maybe concentrate some of these. If it's Southwest, you want to create a route and some circles, we can do that. It's easy for us to do it. It's really no additional dollars.
Thank you. Appreciate the follow-up.
Phone a friend work, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, anybody else would like to testify? Thank you, gentlemen. Let's go online then. Okay, we have Rick Lee first. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Lee, can you hear us? Mr. Lee, turn on your screen and your mic and we're good to go. We still have him, or go to the next one? Oh, there you go. Okay, Mr. Lee, screen and mic, we're good?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I'm technically inept. Mr. Chairman, thank you for listening to this testimony. The Rock Springs Chamber of Commerce and its board of directors are in support of the initiatives directed by the Southwest Wyoming Off-Road Trails Organization, all the work that they do. The efforts of SWAT have been beneficial in improving outdoor recreational opportunities here in Southwest Wyoming, and there's really not a lot more that I can add that hasn't already been said. But we believe, as a Chamber of Commerce, that this initiative will benefit the economy, that the offers of this particular legislation will create greater land usage, connect several communities to form a greater community, which is really what Wyoming's all about. One of the things that we're fond of saying is that Wyoming is really just the biggest small town that you're ever going to be in. And this connects us all together a little bit better. I would say, Mr. Chairman, that the answer that Senator Cole gave you was correct when you asked him about the support that the people of Sweetwater County have for this. They are in support of it. We've had conversations with several people, and we are heavily involved with the pulse of how people feel about these things. And the senator was correct when he said that they are supportive of it. They just need the tools to move forward. And I think that this kind of gives them the tools to advance this program and create good business, which is supporting the economy, which has been said by everybody that's testified to you already. Tourism really is the biggest end result, and that's why we're involved. I can tell you that there has been a phenomenon that, growing up in Rock Springs and being here all my life, I've never seen before, but we are getting calls at the Rock Springs Chamber of Commerce that of people wanting to come here as a destination. That's always been the case for Jackson and Cody and other parts of the state, but Rock Springs is seeing, it's kind of new for us. And we do get calls from people from Tennessee and from other parts of the country who are interested in coming here, and they just want a reason to come. And I think that this would, if we have these tools in our tool bag to offer them, we would see an increase in good, healthy, strong tourism. And that's why we support it as as a Chamber of Commerce, our Board of Directors and our entire membership. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Questions for Mr. Lee out in Rock Springs? Okay, seeing none, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mike, your own? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I did that. Okay. All right. Anything else? Let's go over the bill committee.
I'd like to move it.
Move it. Second. Move and seconded. Page 1, changes. Page 2,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
The only issue I see on page 2 is just the part on the bottom. And I understand what they're doing here with the marked trails, but there's so many places that aren't formal trails that still need to be able to have a legal crossing. So I'm not sure what the director and his group can do to address that, but I think that's something we need to have them, ask him to look into it a little bit for us more.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I think the language is right. I think by having that in there, what they're saying is they'll get a request for a certain segment to be enrolled in the system. And once it's enrolled, then there will be signage
I see.
or marked. So I think this isn't intended to immediately cover all crossings or places. It's meant to be part of the process that would allow for us to enroll certain segments and then be marked as such.
Request comes in.
Does that answer your question, Senator Cooper?
No.
Okay.
I can think of, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I can think of 50 crossings that really need this, just in that corner of the state on the I-25, I-90 corridor. To think that we're going to enroll every one of those is probably not practical. So I would ask the department to look and see if they can look into that a little further, but I don't think that's an impediment to passing the bill.
Okay. As noted, folks who would work on such things, yeah, that would be good. We got a lot of places out there, they're just freelancing the crossings, so see what we can do there. All right. Anything else? Page 3. Page 4. That, take the roll.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Ellis,
Aye.
Senator Jones. Aye. Senator Rufus,
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
Aye. We'll just team up and put this together on the floor together, okay? All right, thank you, everyone who came and attended. Director Reiner, a special thanks to you. That when we first approached you with this was a hard ask, and you reached out and found solutions for us, and a big thank you to you and your crew and staff, okay? Thank you. Item 2, right? All right, open banking. House Bill 62, Representative Western. Senator Rothfuss. Gentlemen, floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Cyrus Western, House District 51. I present to you House Bill 62. I just want to say I'm over the moon about this bill. To give you a little bit of context of why it's here, what it does, all that kind of stuff. The way this works, I know you see it's a joint minerals. Technically, we didn't discuss it all throughout the interim. The reason it's here is because when we created the blockchain task force, I believe it was 2 years ago, there was a requirement that if the bill had to deal with the division of banking or any kind of regulation regarding the division, that it had to be approved by the Minerals Committee, which we did. I believe it was back in November. And that's why it's here. It's just kind of an additional opportunity for ideas to be discussed, debated, and vetted. So that's why it's here, and that's why it says joint minerals on it. The genesis behind this bill and the concept is this. About 5 years ago, we passed some of the regulations regarding these digital asset banks, these crypto banks, the SPDIs, the special purpose depository institutions. And as we've seen, they've been a pretty big success. We've got hundreds of folks here employed in the digital asset space, the crypto space, the blockchain space here in Wyoming. And so this bill kind of adds on to that momentum that we've built. And so what open banking is, it's a little bit of a misnomer in the sense, I kind of look at it as more enhanced banking. The business model of banking, more or less, has stayed the same for hundreds, even thousands of years conceptually. Like in any industry, technology has the ability to really enhance the business model and really enhance the customer experience. And that's really what this is. Open banking allows for these third parties, for these technology companies, the technical name is APIs, Application Program Interface. These API companies to interact with the bank and enhance the experience of its customers, whether they be individual depositors or some of the larger scale customers. So kind of give you some concept of APIs that are currently used today. Right now, I mean, there are things like PayPal, Venmo, that we can instantly transfer money back and forth between folks. They use API vendors, these third-party vendors. And these APIs help transact, I mean, it's billions of dollars every single day. So it's not a new concept. They've been around for, by technology standards, they've been around for a while, and they're a proven concept and they're a proven business model. What this bill does, it allows banks here in Wyoming, again, it's targeted at our, at our digital asset banks, but technically any bank, as you can read in the bill, has the ability to participate this and allow these APIs to interact with their customers and use their customer data to enhance the customer experience. And so just to kind of, that's the broad level of why it's here. Maybe we can go through the bill, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
Take it away. Thank you.
So as you see on page 1, we've got the title, the preamble. We can move right onto page 2, which kind of gets into the meat of the bill. I think a really important concept here is right there on line 6, page 2, the express written consent. A customer's affirmative written response to a clear and conspicuous notice regarding the collection, use, or disclosure of customer data for the purposes of open banking. So this isn't like some little tiny box that you got to click that they kind of force you into clicking. This is a purely opt-in option for these customers to say, very clear, conspicuous way, big flashing letters. This is what it is. This is what what it does. If you don't want to consent, click here. If you do, click here, kind of thing. So it makes it really obvious for the customer to make sure. And again, moving right on there to Romanet 3, talks about open banking and what it is. It means providing access directly or indirectly to customer data from the customer's bank to a third-party financial service provider with the express written consent of the customer and through the use of application programming interfaces. Again, that API concept that I just kind of touched on. Moving right on to line 20, a bank may participate and provide for open banking. Again, that may part's super important. You could say, well, will any of our hometown banks be using this? Decent chance they will not, but we put may in there specifically to say they don't want to engage in this, and they absolutely do not have to. But if they do, if they've got customers that want these kind of enhanced services that these third-party, these APIs can provide, it allows for that opportunity. Moving right there onto page 3, a bank participating and providing for open banking shall comply with all applicable state and federal laws and regulations, including laws and regulations related to protection use of customer data. So following the laws we already have in Title 13, and of course, all the federal laws as well, of which there are many, prior to providing access to any customer data under this section, the participating bank shall obtain a customer's express written consent. Again, coming back to that concept of conspicuous consent. And then, of course, on line 9, the commissioner shall adopt rules regulating the collection, use, and disclosure of customer data in open banking, consistent with all applicable state and federal laws and regulations. And then, of course, we move right on to the effective date. I will ask you to note that on the section 2, you'll see that the effective date is July 1 of next year. The reason we're pushing it back so long is in consultation with the Division of Banking. They kind of asked for that extra time to really dig into this, formulate reasonable regulations, requirements, all that kind of stuff. And so that's why there's that extra time in there for them to allow them to take their time and develop good regs. So that's, I mean, in essence, that's the bill right there. I stand for any questions.
And I see our Representative Western, there are bankers folks here, but what's your interpretation, how they reacted to this in the other part of the building when it was first brought up? Because as you mentioned, some will and some won't.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Again, I think that may part is the really big thing. I think, again, these APIs, I mean, these aren't just fly-by-the-night companies. I mean, for example, Plaid is the big, yes, Plaid, correct? Yeah, Plaid's the biggest one, and I think they had like a $5 or $6 billion valuation. They've got a couple thousand employees. I mean, these are not, techies in their garage making this stuff. These are, really serious companies that are, that are like any other of these vendors that we work with. To maybe give a little bit additional context, if you do kind of talk in that digital asset world and the custodial component, the banking component of digital assets, this is a concept that some of these folks talk about and how it can allow these companies to really enhance that experience. Again, this is a business model that has more or less stayed the same for, since time immemorial. These things have the ability to really enhance that process. And talking with some of these folks, I think if done right, this could be huge. And I think a reasonable follow-up is, do we need this bill? And I would say, for being honest here, no, we don't absolutely have to have this. But as we've done, I think in the past, and certainly this was the case with these digital asset bank bills that we passed 4 or 5 years ago, it plants a flag in the sand saying, hey, we are pro-business, we are pro-innovation. Some folks said with those speedy bank bills, well, we don't know if anything's going to come of it. Is it just really a waste of our time? And here we are 5 years later, again, with hundreds of employees in the state of Wyoming who live here, who work here, who pay taxes here, because we were able to create that legislation. So that's kind of a similar sentiment behind this and what it does. And so obviously I don't want to speak for the Bankers Association, but it's something that some banks here in the state certainly encourage and really have been asking for.
I wanted to hear your take on it first. Senator Roth, this has been a big part of your life.
That it has, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, appreciate my good co-sponsor from over on the House side and his explanation, a couple of additional points that we talked through. One is this is actually fairly common in other countries. Other countries, even some, have mandatory open banking access. Instead of the may, it's a shall. Other jurisdictions have various levels of promotion to provide opportunity for open banking, but what they commonly have then are the regulatory structure in place to actually provide a good foundation for open banking. In the United States, we don't have that right now, and that's regrettable. Over a decade ago, slightly over a decade ago, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was tasked with drawing up nationwide rules and regulations for open banking so that any bank in the country can engage in open banking. They're not done yet. As with lots of good federal things, maybe that timeline's delayed a little bit. And they've actually become a little bit more aggressive recently, and they have some drafts in place and they're reviewing it. So there are some federal Consumer Financial Protection Bureau regulations that are under consideration, and at some point, maybe those will come out. What we recognize, though, is that we don't have to wait for the feds. We haven't always done it in the past, and we don't even know what the timeline will be for these to come forward. What we do know is that you might be able to do this right now. There's nothing certainly that prohibits, and in fact, Representative Western mentioned Plaid. So we know that certain third-party applications through APIs are being put in place. There's no direct barrier. What we lack, though, is an appropriate regulatory structure for implementing open banking with any confidence, with any trust, with things like the one thing that we explicitly called out in this bill, which is express written consent, so that you have to not just opt in by checking that box after reading the end user license agreement where you scroll down as quickly as you possibly can and then click accept at the bottom. None of us have ever done that, Mr. Chairman, but I've heard stories about it. And to make sure that we have an appropriate regulatory structure. So as Representative Western noted, this provides 2 years to develop a regulatory structure, gives us another legislative session, gives us an interim to work it through so that our Division of Banking can find out what changes we might need statutorily as they're working through rules and regulations, and as they're fortunately actually working from the guidance from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as sort of a baseline set of standards, but ones that we don't have to adopt because they're not actually implemented yet. So we can be the leader in this space. No other state has any regulations on the books. And in fact, some people say, just wait for the feds, just wait for the feds, it'll be confusing. We might hear testimony about that. it's been a decade. I think we can stop waiting for the feds and always counting on the feds, and we can be a leader here. If the feds come in and lay a framework over, as is indicated in the B paragraph, we're going to have to comport with the federal regulations. We won't have the capacity to override. But what I think we'll have as a result of engaging and being an early adopter is we'll have a seat at that table. We'll certainly be instrumental, like we were in all digital asset property rights, where we set the stage for digital asset property laws. And rather than us adopting the Uniform Law Commission's legislation as it related to digital assets, the Uniform Law Commission adopted Wyoming's property statutes with regard to digital assets. So this gives us, once again, a good opportunity to be a leader, to set the trend. And if we do have a sound foundation, then we'll be doing what's consistent with the theme of the Select Committee, which is to regulate to enable, to provide bright lines to industry so that they can be comfortable, set up in Wyoming, have state chartered banks, whether it's our Speedy banks or our traditional banks. Remember, a state chartered bank can still operate in the rest of the states. So if anybody wants to engage in open banking and really be proactive and innovative in this space, they could charter in Wyoming. We'll have clear guidance. We'll have a regulatory structure. We'll have the Division of Banking with rules and regulations in place. And that's the type of innovative environment that we want to produce to the Select Committee.
Thank you. Questions for either the representative or the senator? Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just onto this express written consent, I'm just trying to understand how you envision that working. I think the only time I ever go into my bank is when I set up an account, and rarely after that. Usually if I need to drop off checks, you do it through your phone or through a drive-through. So I'm just kind of curious how this works with the written consent. If banks want to start offering this service and promoting it, I'm just trying to think through how that might work in your mind. And then I appreciate the explanation on the effective dates. I was listening to our colleagues down the hall, and I dislike it when we have these multi-stepped effective dates of the agency can start writing rules. But then it's immediately effective, but the act takes effect July 1st or whatever. I dislike that. I just think we should just get back to it takes effect July 1st, and then the agency knows they should be writing rules. I understand the explanation, though, with what you're trying to get here, so I do think this is unique, and I appreciate that explanation.
Either one of you?
But back to the affirmative written response, how do you envision that
That one
working?
first, and then see what you think about combining it all into one so we don't have stages. Go ahead, either one of you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, on the express written consent, statutorily through UETA, which is the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, written consent, it can still be electronic consent, right? We've already clarified that in statute, but it's just the threshold of what it actually means, where you're going to have some type of electronic signature or true consent that's meaningful, as opposed to just the click the end user license agreement at the bottom and what in the world did you just agree to? We want to make sure that there's the opt-in and opt-out capacity. And the Division of Banking, which, they'll obviously provide testimony and you can direct this to them, but we've had conversations with them about that specific topic, and they have a good concept of the standard that they need to be applying with regard to that. As far as the split effective date, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I think you're exactly right that in this instance, we don't want this to go into law yet. We want the rules and regulations written. And then we want another cycle of legislature. And then we want to be able to put the force of law behind what they put forward. And I think that's the responsible process in this instance when we're the first of our kind. We're leading here. We're not following. It's not a copy paste what other people are doing. It's a blaze a new trail. And so the Select Committee wanted to be sure that even if we're leading, we're certainly wanting to lead in a responsible way that protects our consumers. And so we felt more comfortable providing that second year, and that's the reason for our split date.
Senator Ellis, follow up with response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, I appreciate that. And I do think in this instance, that makes sense to me. I just was taking the opportunity to express that to my colleague from down the hall. But back to the affirmative written response, I guess my only concern is, when banks are urging us to go paperless, you get that every single time, you know, you log into your account, click here, click here, click here. And so it is a little concerning to me that that might, you know, for the banks that want to engage in this, you know, might start using some of those tactics of, are you sure you don't want to open bank? Oh, are you sure? Are you sure? And so I don't know if you've had any thought of how to maybe limit some of that promotion if there are customers who after a while, I think we all break down and just say, fine, I'll go paperless. So I just want to make sure that if we're really creating an opt-in, that it's not, that really is an opt-in. It doesn't turn into something that you just opt in because you're tired of the nuisance of being bugged.
Gentlemen?
Senator, I would just say that it's very consistent with the interest of the select committee. And again, you'll probably hear testimony. I don't know who we have for public testimony, but that was a concern that we were being too rigid. You know, the desire by industry tends to be, let's make it as easy as possible so that we can sell these services, which is a little bit contrary to what the select committee wants. We want these services available, but the only thing we're providing clear guidance on pretty much through this bill at this point, prior to the rules and regulations, is that there shall be express written consent for engagement in this. And the reason that's there is because of the sensitivity to the point that you're making. If there's a way to strengthen it more, to make it very clear, I think we're happy to go down that path, because it was the priority that we had. That we didn't want our consumers to be misled and feel pressured into these services they need to be opting in. And I think we use the same language. The Genetic Information Privacy Act amendments that we did last year or the year before had some very good express written consent language, and I think we borrowed some language from that, if I'm not mistaken.
Senator Ellis, you want to strengthen it or leave it there? Okay. All right, fair enough. Further questions? Further questions? Thank you, gentlemen. Who else would like to testify? We've got the folks from Bankers here. We've got some others. Go ahead, sir. Welcome. State your name.
Yes, good afternoon. Jeremiah Bishop. I'm the State Banking Commissioner and head of the Wyoming Division of Banking. I believe this is the first time I've actually sat in the Senate, this committee during this session. So just a little bit of a background. We, of the bank regulators in Wyoming, we oversee and administer Title 13, and we supervise Wyoming state chartered banks, trust companies, and other entities that may fall under our purview. I have a few comments to make on this particular bill. I'll try to go through it somewhat quickly, but if you have any questions, definitely let me know as I go along. Some of the areas I want to talk about is the scope of potential rulemaking, since this bill does give us rulemaking authority, and some of the topics that may be covered in rulemaking. And then we also talk about maybe potential rulemaking at a later date if this bill gains traction or is passed. And then also make some comments on the relationship with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rulemaking that Senator Office discussed, a little bit of background on what they're working on. So the first item is the initial scope of potential rulemaking. At a high level, this bill seeks to enhance customer protection because it requires that a customer receive notice and provide their consent before the bank provides their data to a third-party financial services provider. As discussed today, without this bill, this is an activity that can actually be done. Even without this bill puts a little bit more protection in place of what must be received by the bank prior to sharing that information.
Go ahead.
So this bill in several spots requires rulemaking authority. So in initial rulemaking, we probably provide more detail on the notice that the customer should receive prior to the bank providing access to their data. For example, when is that notice? When is it clear and conspicuous? What does that mean? Areas or topics to be addressed in the notice in order to adequately cover collection, use, or disclosure of customer data. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail here in my next comment. But since this bill clearly indicates the intent to have a notice and consent structure before a bank shares in data, that's where we focus our initial rulemaking authority. And so going into that a little bit in more detail, we've reached no conclusions at this point of what topics we might required to be in the notice, but there's a broad range of things that we might include. I want to briefly go through some of the topics in open banking, and just in order to preview what the division may decide to address in rulemaking. And each of these topics I'll cover could be potentially included in that notice. The first topic that could be included in our rulemaking regarding the notice is the data access scope. That's about whether third parties with authorized access to customer data from the bank can access only the data necessary to provide the product or service selected by the consumer, or whether those third parties can access more broad information not directly related to that specific product. Another item is data retention, and that's about whether third parties with authorized access to customer data from the bank will maintain consumer data only as long as necessary to provide the product or service, or whether or not they can hold on to that data for a longer period of time. Another item is data access transparency. It's about whether and how consumers can request information from the bank on what customer data of theirs is shared and with whom it's shared with. Another item is limit on data use, and that's about whether the bank will prohibit or limit third parties from secondary uses of the data, of the consumer data. In other words, should the third party use the consumer data only for the product or service provided to the customer, or can that third party use this data for other purposes not specifically detailed in that initial notice? Another area is revoking consent, and that's just about whether and how a consumer can revoke their consent for the bank to share their consumer's data. Next item is expiration of consent, and that's about whether and when a consumer's consent to open banking expires and needs to be renewed, or if the consent is permanent unless revoked. So that's something we could clearly line out in rulemaking. Data accuracy is about whether and how a consumer can dispute and resolve inaccurate data shared in open banking. And the final item is a data security. Obviously, this is about the bank protecting against security breaches, including its own due diligence into third-party vendors' practices for data security. That's definitely a topic that banks are familiar with right now. Anytime you have a third-party relationship, you need to do due diligence, not only into the company themselves, but also what's that data security look like. So these issues are important for consumer privacy and to help prevent the misuse of data. And it could be, like I said, any or all of these may be considered in our rulemaking authority. As you can tell, it's pretty broad what we might include. But given the notice and consent structure, that's where we would focus on, is some of that information, expanding on that in rulemaking. The next item is potential rulemaking later on, kind of as this gains traction and we see a little bit more, and because it's pretty broad rulemaking authority. And so the most likely area that we may address at a later time is the expanding on the customer agreement that govern this collection usage disclosure. A lot of those topics I just discovered could either be included in that notice, or it could actually be included in a written agreement with the bank. So we could clear that out with later rulemaking authority. The final topic was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB, and kind of what they've been doing this. As Senator Rothfuss said, they were instructed since 2010 to issue rules on consumer access to financial records. I think that was a part of the Dodd-Frank Act that was passed. While this concept of open banking wasn't actually around back then, it effectively is very similar to this issue, providing third-party businesses with access to consumer financial records. So just a brief history of what they've been doing. To this date, the CFPB has not issued any proposed or final rules in this area. In 2017, they issued the Consumer Protection Principle, Consumer Authorized Financial Data Sharing and Aggregation document. In 2020, the CFPB sought public comment related to open banking to help inform proposed rules, but the CFPB did not issue any proposed rules after that comment. Just last year, in October 2022, the CFPB released a 70-page outline of proposals and alternatives under consideration for rulemaking, and they set a deadline of January 25th of this year to receive comments on that document. So far to this date, they have not published any report summarizing comments received during that, with that issue they put out. And then a little bit of a timeline that the CFPB has publicly said is they expect to issue proposed rules on this area sometime in 2023, and hopefully final rules in 2024. Again, that's not a concrete timeline. That's just what we've seen from their publication so far. What they've issued in 2022, October of last year, it's similar to this bill because it includes at a high level a concept where the consumer receives an authorized disclosure and must prevent consent to the terms of the disclosure before that data is shared. The CFPB proposal has a third party, not the bank, provide the disclosure. The third party then initially receives the consent and forwards it to the bank. This particular bill leaves it open that potentially either the bank or the third party would provide that notice, but ultimately the bank needs to receive that consent, that written consent prior to sharing that information. The 22 proposal from the CFPB is also different from this bill because the CFPB says it would require firms to make a consumer's financial information available to a third party at that consumer's discretion, but this bill does not require that banks make that data available to third parties. It just says if it does so, here's what they must receive before providing that information. So with the section in this bill that requires our rulemaking authority to be consistent with applicable state and federal law. Again, this was discussed a little bit earlier. If the CFPB does come out with final rules at a later time, and we've already issued our rules, we'll have to go back and probably likely amend our rules to make sure that they're consistent with what the CFPB says at that time. Like I said, however, right now, we don't know what those proposed rules are from the CFPB. Those are all the comments I had. I know that was quite a bit, but I'd happy to take any questions.
So if this bill goes through, your endless promulgation of rules, who gets to do all this? You and these two legislators?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That'd be myself and my staff.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
One point that I think is kind of important, Commissioner, if we took no action now and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau put forward its rules and regulations, wouldn't you effectively have to then do your own rules and regulations as well? Although you'd probably be cribbing them primarily from the CFPBs as the baseline. Is that fair?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Office. So I understand correctly, if we don't do anything with this bill and it doesn't pass and the CFPB does come out with rules at a later time, we may not have to actually make rules at that time just because simply, we'd actually wait for federal banking agencies to maybe adopt those rules. In which case, again, we don't mirror every rulemaking of our own to mirror federal agencies because it is banks have to comply with both. So if this bill doesn't pass and the CFPB comes out with those rules and they're adopted by Federal Reserve, FDIC, the OCC, then our banks would have to comply with whatever those agencies come out with. We wouldn't have to actually create those rules at that time.
What would the timeline be on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would the timeline be on that in terms of implementation, assuming that the CFPB adopted the rules in 2024? When would a bank be utilizing those types of rules if they're a Wyoming State Chartered bank?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, I think a lot of that depends on the size of the bank. Right now, the CFPB has direct authority over banks over $10 billion in assets. So if a bank was over that size threshold, they would immediately fall under the CFPB rules. If they're under that, however, they would have to wait for federal banking agencies to adopt those rules. I can't talk about the timeline of when that might happen. It would be at a later date. They'd have to get together among most likely all the agencies and adopt those rules. And so I couldn't really give you a clear answer on how long that would take.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? You, sir, you live in a very detailed world. Thank you. All right, anybody else would like to testify?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. I can't tell you where we are on this thing. I scratched my head. There's a lot of points that I would like to clarify, at least from the banking side of things, and I don't know where it all goes, but I'll give you these points and then open it up to questions and see what we can do to help. I think, as Senator Roth has said, we have all sorts, and Representative Western, there's apps out there that are doing these APIs that do stuff now. You can do stuff with QuickBooks. You can do whatever that actually interface with your accounts. And then you have some of these different APIs that they're trying to do financial planning for you. So they don't necessarily need to have transactions done. They just want to know what you have in various accounts, whether it's a retirement account or whether it's a savings account or something, that the customer is actually wanting them to look at to help with their business planning or the retirement planning or what have you. I will readily agree. I think that there are customers out there that want this. They got it now. There's nothing out there that stops this from happening. So the question then is, what do we do with this? And I think I like the words that Senator Rothfuss used, and we're putting up some guardrails a little bit. We're going to make sure that we have some ideas of what you can do and what you can't do. And the idea of the written permission to do that, I think is great, because I think that does elevate it to the point where your customers, the bank's customers, understand what they're getting into. But on the other hand, there are a lot of stuff that I'm not so sure that's a great deal of comfort to me. I think the comment was made that, yeah, over in Europe, they do a lot of this open banking. They also have the highest degree of fraud when it comes to this. So I'm not sure by setting the rules that you actually fix the fraud part of it, because they have an enormous amount of fraud over there. You can say, well, they can opt in or opt out. Maybe they can, but it's always a problem. So I don't know where you go with that. There was a lot of comments about the CFPB, and that's been one of the biggest things that I've been really struggling with, is that if the CFPB does come out with its own rules and regulations, we as banks have to follow it. I mean, we're chartered in Wyoming, but we're subject to the FDIC or the OCC or whatever the Federal Reserve. We have to follow those. So to say, well, we're going to put our own rules out here, maybe they'll be the same as, maybe they won't. If not, we'll make our changes. Well, you don't have a fiscal note on this, but as you just heard the Division of Banking say, that's their staff spending a lot of time on this. And that is a big concern to your banks, because we're the ones that fund that. We're the ones that doesn't come out of your general fund. That's money that comes from the banks. So if we're going to finance this, do we have to hire more people? Is it going to take more time? And what is the cost and the exercise they have to go through this, only to find out maybe the CFPB is going to do something or not? I don't know. And then you got the CFPB. Honestly, to be just quite honest with you, the CFPB is not one of the federal government's most beautiful moves in the whole world. These guys are clueless half the time, and they don't get funding through the House. They're not subject to that. They get their funding through the Federal Reserve. So these guys don't do anything. And what do they do for consumers? I haven't seen anything that comes out of it since they've been starting. So I'm not sure relying on them is any good, but I know that they have effective law. And so they come up with their rules. And so honestly, your bankers are going, we don't know what we're going to do here. I think Senator Rothfuss made a great point that if we put some stuff here, like you talked about the Uniform Laws Commission, yes, they came to us. Are we, is the Division of Banking or the Wyoming legislature going to be invited to the table with the CFPB when they start putting their rules? No, I don't think so. The CFPB does their own thing, and they've always done their own thing. And so that's where you sit there and struggle and go, I don't know whether I like this, whether I don't. Do I think there are some good things? Yes. If we wait a couple of years, is it going to do anything? I'm not sure it's going to do any good anyway, because I think that these are things that people already have out there. Is it good banking practice? Yes. If the CFPB comes out and says, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to put these rules down, and guess what? It only applies to those banks that have $10 billion in assets or more. Don't worry about you, Wyoming banks. It doesn't have anything to do with you. But that's not how it works, because then the regulators come in and they say, you're right, this does not apply to you. But we think it's best practices. And that's how it comes trickling down. So you come down onto the Wyoming banks anyway, at some point in time. Honestly, I just struggle with it. The one area that I'm not so sure I agree with, the comments were made that this is for our special purpose depository institutions. I don't know about that. It applies to all the banks. But right now, I'll tell you, with the SEC, their rulings, and the Federal Reserve, I'm not having a whole lot of confidence in Speedy Banks right now. I'm not sure where they're going. So I wouldn't do this because we think we want to support the bank, Speedy Banks. I think you want to do it, if you're going to do it, to support banking in general. And I think every bank in town has, and in the state probably has, some kind of apps that you can use and will interface with a lot of them. I don't know about one that maybe, that's up in Basin, Wyoming. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But For the most part, that's what our customers want. So we will deal with it. And I do like the idea for the guardrails. But I don't know about the rulemaking. I don't know how long it takes. I don't know if you have to change, because honestly, the division banking can do whatever and say, here it is. The feds are going to say what they're going to say, and they control the purse strings because they control all banking, which is not a bad thing, but not maybe the most ideal for some of us, but that's just the way our financial system works. That's why we have a Federal Reserve. That's why we have the FDIC. That's why we have these things, to make sure that banking does work. So I can't tell you, we are really throwing our hands up in the air. We don't know what's going on, and half of them say, well, I don't care anymore. And the rest of them, if you look down into the southwest corner of the state, they don't like it. They don't like any of it because they think it's just another bunch of bureaucracy that's coming down. I think that the blockchain committee, and I think especially Senator Rothfuss and Representative Western, have done a great deal of work on this thing, and I hate to just not say it's not worth anything. We like working with them. We think that they are very focused on innovation and how we're doing this stuff. But this rulemaking thing has just really got us into our head spinning, going, we're not sure where it's going. And we're going to be the ones that have to deal with it at some point in time. But we don't know. It just looks to us like a lot more bureaucracy, and maybe it's not ready for prime time. And for that, Mr. Chairman, I'd just sit for any questions.
And if we were to go through, I hear you saying you pick up the tab for all the rulemaking. All right. Questions for Mr. Meyer? Questions? Meyer, thank you. I got one other, I heard this with the representative's expression and report. Some can, some can't. But people can go, and then what I heard is they can go out and do it anyway, but some banks can, some banks can't. But people eventually can do this on their own anyway. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would say that whatever the banks are going to do, whatever they have to do to take care of their customers, they want to do. But some banks, some of this takes, a little bit of investment and some technical expertise. So there may be some banks that just can't afford to do that at some point in time, so they may not offer that. They may find themselves, if they're in that position, they won't last long because customers don't like that. They want to be able to do that. I think Senator Ellis, you made a comment, when was the last time I actually walked into a bank? I can't tell you the last time that I've had to actually, other than to go to meet bankers, to just actually do banking, I can do everything on my phone or my computer. And I think that's what people want, and they slowly get to that point. I don't think we have any banks in Wyoming right now that are saying, nope, you got to write the check. You can't do any of this. You can't do any of that. You can't do it online. But when it comes to these APIs and where they're going with them, I think banks their customers will demand it, or they'll move to a bank that will. And so I think banks are open to this. They understand the importance of it. They understand why we need to do this stuff. It's just how we get there is what's most confusing.
So I hear you saying they would welcome it and they'd do it, but we just, between here and getting that accomplished is a little bit convoluted right now.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly it. I think it's just how we get from here to there.
All right, thank you. Further questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks. Scott, getting back to the point a few minutes ago, and Representative Western delineated the need for this for Speedy Banks as being a little bit different from our traditional state banks. And I think the concept there isn't that our state banks wouldn't want to use it as you've expressed, but sort of the business model of the Speedy Bank is actually to be potentially a 50-state bank, where I don't know if any of our other state chartered banks are looking to be 50-state solutions. They're mostly looking to operate in the state of Wyoming. Is that a fair assessment?
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I would probably agree with you that we don't have any state charter banks that are looking to do 50, but I can see them in the neighboring states. And as we've kind of experienced over the last year, there's been a consistent movement towards consolidation. And so we have banks from out of states that are acquiring banks in Wyoming. Those do cover a lot of states. Whether it's all 50, I don't know, but I would think that that footprint is getting bigger all the time.
And yeah, follow up on that is, if you're looking for sort of a competitive advantage between the state of Wyoming and other states, if we have a regulatory structure in place for open banking in the absence of any other regulatory structure, you know, a lot of times we think of regulation as being a disadvantage for doing something. That's our natural response. But it seems to me that in the realm of banking, regulation is actually an advantage in terms of legitimacy and the flexibility for an entity to actually proceed with something with the confidence that they're legally allowed to do it. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't know, because, I mean, it's already the most highly regulated business in the United States. I mean, between the feds and the states, you got examiners coming into your banks every so often, and everybody looking at things, they're already regulated. Having another set of regulations, will that make it easier? Will it make sure that they know what they're doing? I think they know, but I do think the ideas that you proposed, that, you know, we have written consent, we know that the consent is only going to last this time. I mean, I can tell you, I've had stuff that I have online, and I think we talked about that, the check the box thing. I couldn't tell you if that was something I did last year or if I did that 10 years ago. And I think that would be something that would be very beneficial to everybody to know that, hey, you signed this consent, it's only good for a year or two or whatever, so that people understand what they're getting into. And I think that's the important part of it. Maybe that from a regulatory standpoint, that makes it a little bit more desirable. But honestly, I don't know which banks are not doing that at this point in time. Anyway, they're just going to have their own versions.
Senator?
No, that's good thinking.
Thank you. All right, folks. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Appreciate it. Anybody else like to testify? Got a question for you, Senator Rothfuss. This interim? What was your thought? Oh, we do. That's right. We do have a couple. Thank goodness. Okay, Mike Carone.
Good afternoon. I was just let in.
Mr. Crone, turn on your camera if you would, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure thing.
Floor is yours.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Senate Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee. I'm Mike Carone with the Consumer Data Industry Association, CDIA for short. A little bit about us. I've testified before the committee before, but for those who are not familiar, we represent the consumer reporting industry, which includes the nationwide credit bureaus, regionalized and specialized credit bureaus, along with background check and residential screening companies. I'm not going to, run down what the bill does, as we've all been over it, but I would just like to point out the CFPB actions. I know it's been a while, and I agree with others on this call that with it being since 2010 with Dodd-Frank, it's been some time, but the CFPB's recent announcements indicate that they're going to propose a rule in 2023. With that right around the corner, we really, think with moving forward with this legislation would just cause potential conflicts down the road, and we would urge against it and see what the CFPB is doing. So one example I would like to give before closing out here is that with the API establishments in the bill, it's going to require multiple consents by the consumer, and that will significantly slow down product getting to the marketplace. And that's a concern we have going forward. So with that being said, we would consider amending that provision out if this were to move forward. But we'd also recommend, with the uncertainty at the CFPB level right now and a rule coming out, to caution against passing this legislation this year. So thank you for consideration of my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Crone? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Crone, for providing testimony. It's my understanding then that the CDIA is probably working to lobby against inclusion of an express written consent standard with the CFPB rules and regulations through their rulemaking. Is that a fair assessment? Is that accurate?
Go ahead, sir.
I would not be able to answer what our work is on the federal level right now. I only work in state government relations. I'd be happy to go back and get an answer for you, though, and follow up with that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that would be great if you would do that. But that does seem to be the clear impetus of this, is opposition to express written consent as a standard. What would the standard be that the CDIA is interested in adhering to, if not express written consent?
Mr. Crone?
No, thank you. That's a question I'd have to consult with the bankers on, if CDI were to give a position on that.
Great, thank you.
But I'd be happy to follow up with you.
That'd be great, thank you.
With all the work coming at the federal level, we haven't seen this introduced on the state level, so it's, it's an interesting approach. But we do appreciate your willingness to look into this, and you're up to date on what the CFPB is doing, but it's just interesting timing that they get active on this right now, but thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Crone. You've never seen anything like this on the state level, correct?
Not in my 4 years with the Consumer Data Industry Association.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you for
not in the
joining.
last 4 to 5.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the.
All the best. Okay, Penny Robbins. Okay. Well, this one, I feel like Mr. Myers. Some for, some against. Are we there yet? What's your pleasure, committee? All right. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief. I guess if you kind of look at this letter, what I'm seeing is that, hey, you guys are trying to go too far in protecting customer data. You have too many consents. And be that as it may, I think, again, the good actors in any space, where there might not be enough regulation, they want the regulation. So long as it's even-handed, reasonable, and fair, they want that. Let's go back, for example, for the oil and gas industry, pre-fracking. Oil and gas drilling has been going on for a long time. Fracking and kind of the cost effectiveness of it was a kind of a new thing, but all the good actors in that space said, we realize regulation is necessary. We want to be part of that conversation, but we understand that it's necessary. We might be able to do this right now, but having fair and even-handed regulation is important. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that a lot of these people who would take advantage of this and these APIs say, these banks can say, sure, we can do this right now, but we welcome those kind of sideboards to kind of give us those guide rails needed to conduct ourselves in a fair and equitable way, and have that regulation lay that framework. So I guess that's all I asked.
A chance to have any further questions? Thank you. Go ahead, Senator.
Just briefly on that point, I think the fracking example is a perfect one. Federal government was working on fracking rules and regulations at the time that we adopted ours, and then we codified ours, and I was part of the Minerals Committee at that point in time. What ended up happening then after we codified ours, which were the best in the country, is that the federal government looked at ours and did a lot of copy and paste and then weakened them, oddly enough. And so we went back and objected to the weakened fracking rules and regulations, recognizing that they had some poor engineering, I guess, backing some of the concepts that they had, and put in place again an effort to improve them nationally. I don't have a lot of confidence necessarily in the efforts and activities of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on behalf of the Federal Reserve. And I'll just note that it was the Federal Reserve that just killed our speedy banks the other day. So maybe I'm a bit bitter. But the idea that we're going to wait for them to tell us what to do, once again, is not something I'm interested in.
Okay, members, we're running out of time here. What's your pleasure?
I'd like to move it.
Moved and seconded?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right, page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. No amendments. Take roll.
I'll make a comment quick. Sure. We spent a lot of time on this in the interim. Excuse me. The people involved put an awful lot of work into it. Is it a perfect tool yet? Probably not, but it was an interim topic. It was brought here by the interim committee, and I'd sure like to see support to move it forward and let us continue to hold on it a little bit.
You reminded me that was the question I was leading into with Senator Rothfuss, where we went a different direction. It was the same thought then, Senator Rothfuss, no doubt. Okay.
Yes.
All right, folks, any other comments? Take the roll.
Senator Cooper.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Jones.
Aye.
Senator Rutherford.
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
Aye. Okay, thank you. That's it for our committee.
Thank you,
Back up to the floor. And work a lot of general file. Thank you.
Working on those
representing-
buds.